My guess is we're recording now because I pressed a button that said that. All right. SwarmLinda is a paper that came to my mind that was kind of in the corpus of research that I've done for EISPP or ISIP, or maybe the MatchMaking Wayfarer. I'm not sure. I mean, I know Samuel suggested a better name than an acronym. But anyways, the idea behind swarm intelligence is a bunch of local interactions amongst different in life, like ants or bees or birds, starlings or something, would allow as an interesting phenomena. It's kind of a branch of AI, and I believe TB was suggesting that stigmergic collaboration, which this paper is about an implied version of it. I mean, maybe not the entire version, but is kind of modeling that. So there's ants going around and they're forming clusters and they're leaving pheromones to kind of hint to other ants to drop more tuples there in this place, in this virtual space called tuple space. And the ants aren't really like centrally coordinating each other, or so I believe because they're not centrally coordinating, that allows it to be very scalable. And so let's see. So okay, so I wish I would have done better with this.
Mixing stuff.
Yeah. Do you have any ideas? I'm getting a mental block, but okay. So you have templates, right? And they have some sort of like I think based on the generative communication paper, they can not only be like some sort of label and have like some integer or string or something for that, labeling that, and then you have the tuples being moved around representing that. But I believe they can also be functions. So the idea, he was looking at Gerlentler's paper and realizing that would really only work for parallel computing. Lenda was a programming language, and claims that it was, I'm reading out, fully distributed space and time. But he said that it was restricted amount of servers, and it cannot really cope with adaptiveness and scalability in an open environment. So the whole premise of the technical report was to look into that. So that's why Daniel Graff explored this thing about swarm intelligence, and and the whole premise of looking at this was to see if, I honestly don't know what's best for building a pure production system of like a lot of hackerspaces collaborating and sharing data. But this seemed like an approach. Of course, there was one thing in there, then like on page 26, where he talked about like tuple retrieval, and he talked about finding things with the hash functions, and like in some of these systems, like I know like I looked briefly at like Holochain is kind of of like what have you learned from blockchain, which has like a consensus amongst everything, and IPFS, and then so this, I guess this came out of Scepter and Metacurrency project or something like that. So they've been working on it for a while, and then let me need some other papers I had printed out, and so I'm kind of rambling. So like
maybe we could just go around and everybody share.
I'm kind of rambling. I mean, I'll try to like go through the paper and try to like recall like what I learned, but like, yeah, maybe that would be useful and get my mind jogging and your guys' mind jogging too. Appreciate it, Gabriel.
Yeah.
Okay. Do we want to go in the like alphabetical order for this? I can start.
Yeah, sure.
Just looking on the voice channel back there, I bet this seems to be the easiest. So I thought it was interesting to think about like the different ant behaviors, like, and taking those behaviors and gathering some sort of inspiration from that. And I also thought about like myself as an ant in my life, you know, when it comes to like social groups, I'm kind of like crawling the different social groups, and like the way I got to this server was I joined the Cryptorado Discord group, which is like a Web3 cryptocurrency stuff in Colorado, but like that's not necessarily stuff that like I was really looking for when I was doing the projects last year. But essentially what I want to do is create like some sort of distributed thing where you can deploy stuff like you do on like the Azure cloud. So like you'll have like a template of like things that you can like deploy and know that those things are deployed, you know, but like have it so that it's not necessarily in like owned by like Microsoft, Google, or anything like that, but like you could do that here, you know, with peer-to-peer stuff. And then when I read this paper, I was kind of like thinking, well, there's a lot of problems with that, which is like, you know, nodes turn on and off all the time. This seems like an interesting potential application for like content distribution networks, like if you were to try to implement one of those, but I'm not like really up to date with all the different Web3 stuff, so like maybe you guys can kind of like fill me in there. But like that's just kind of what I was thinking, is like if you wanted to share like images on a website or like just like content and make it available to people, and have the lowest latency there, like this is something that I could see might help. That was my initial impression.
Cool. If we're going alphabetical, I guess I'm next. Yeah, I didn't have a good full reading of it, but I've definitely been nerding out lately on Igmergy and emergence, and how like and information as well. Like those are kind of like three things that I've really been learning and reading about, and so this paper really like fit into that very nicely. So I think the idea of like tuples was new to me in terms of the implementation of them and how they distribute and flow. And I think that's really interesting. Like I want to read more like through the whole paper because I think there's like a lot of gems in there. But like, yeah, I definitely really think the only way a system like this is going to work where like the best content kind of like bubbles to the top and it's like useful in a lot of ways and there's control from the users and things kind of like form automatically instead of having to be top down. Like instead of creating like a Facebook group with some topic or whatever, or creating like, I don't know, a Discord or something and saying, okay, this is what it's going to be about. Like, I'm just imagining how this could totally change how like people of like mind like find each other based on information and content shared and the pheromones, you know, left by people's like, you know, following their interests in a network. And so that like a community could be formed very easily, but then like, you know, if the community is not really existing anymore or being used, then it kind of just like fades off as the pheromones aren't active anymore. So I thought it was interesting how they were kind of approaching like the time to live of a tuple, like each time somebody interacts with content or something, it kind of like re-ups that timer. I think that could be a good approach. Let's see. Anthills being tuple spaces and roads being links. Thought that was interesting metaphor. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, my intuition is that this is very like powerful. If we were to build technology after the way ants behave and work, I think it would be really valuable and would produce a lot of interesting results. But I don't know what the status of SwarmLinda is or Linda, and I'm trying to see how to basically apply all of these things to a web-based peer-to-peer network. So I'm curious to see what I can learn from it as far as that's concerned. But yeah, those are my initial thoughts.
I mostly got to skim over it. I can like read into depth of it, but the whole it's kind of like a compute over data type project the Swarm is, and I think what I kind of get the gist of is in this environment, there's multiple entry points for the compute to occur. Give me just a second. I've got to cancel it. But the compute over data allows you to have multiple entry points for your compute to come in. And that's the ant in this case. And the data is the pheromones. And as it computes, it can move through the data as it chooses. And that's like contrarian to the contemporary style of know everything that's happening in the environment and from a central standpoint, or like a queen, essentially, tell everybody what to do. But this way, everybody kind of has their environmental intelligence that is driving their compute instead.
From an architectural standpoint, I really like the concept of combining compute and memory into a single unit. It breaks with Von architecture, where you have memory and compute separate. I also like I think that the things that make me nervous are, and I didn't read the paper, so I'm just listening to you guys. But the things that make me nervous are the lack of like medium, or the medium itself is going to be more important than in this particular compute style than in some of the other styles, because it requires a either like you're hooking into like the directly into the either like if the triple space has like the the ability to add in like Lambda functions that could do it, or if there's like a way of like of creating like memory in network, where like you've got a loop of connections happening, and they create like a piece of memory that contains itself as long as the memory is or the loop is active. Or if you've got or if the time to live also allows you to have like small amounts of memory that you can keep in the network. Those could all be very powerful, but again, like implementation details are going to be really critical for something like this. Like, is it being physically, how it's being physically manifested, and how it's being actually used.
One response that comes to mind as far as like packaging kind of memory or state so that it's more easily retrieved is I've been reading the docs for IPLD, which, if you don't know, is the data model layer of IPFS, and it got like broken out of IPFS. Like the team, I guess, that was working on IPFS realized that IPLD was like a really good thing on its own that could be used outside of IPFS just as its own technology. And it's basically just like the content addressing portion of IPFS. So like if you have, let's say, a social media post or something, and you put that through a hashing algorithm, you have a unique PID or content identifier of that data. That identifier could only ever point to that data, and if you change a piece of the data, it changes the identifier. So you have this like link to the content, and regardless of where it's stored, and this is where IPFS comes in, you can search through IPFS to get to get where it's stored by the ID of the content. So the whole reason why I'm saying that is I think it would be an interesting implementation to kind of roll up a bunch of those CIDs when it's one piece of content or like a block of content or something that you want to make easily retrievable. You just kind of like gather all those CIDs and you roll them up into one CID so that now like fetching all that data is as easy as fetching one thing. And I guess I'm really just describing what a Merkle DAG is, or I don't know. I'm new to that kind of stuff, but yeah, like it seems like IPLD's implementation would make this very easy to accomplish. But I'm not quite sure 100% on the technicals as I'm still kind of looking into it.
Yeah, you can kind of think of the world as a DAG, and each cell's a different connection, and the graph represents what its immediate connections are. And essentially, in the SwarmLinda paper, they're applying physical attributes to the nodes on the graph, and as the ants traverse the vertexes, they make decisions. And essentially, by making decisions, they affect the graph. They might make modifications to the vertex by traversing it and even being there.
And just to be explicit, like the decisions on the graph itself is a form of compute, and so you can actually use that compute space for calculations. That's essentially how like neural networks work.
Yeah, it seems like this is like very neural network adjacent research.
Yeah, back propagation algorithms are really useful for value proposition assignments because it's one of the few ways that I'm at least aware of where without making a judgment on the value of a task, you can by the implementation of the task and the success of the task, backpropagate the success of the venture, which is really powerful for like value proposition networks. But I've not seen it used heavily in the space though.
Could you define a value proposition network, or how you understand that?
So I might be butchering it, but if you have a value, so usually it's when you have like like you got a bunch of tasks or a bunch of events, and they all have a undefined value, and the value can be, and the
It's built into the system. It's even better because then you can take it with you, as opposed to when you get fired, you lose it. I've got other ideas about that too, but
sorry, I dropped out for about 2 or 3 or 4 minutes because my computer decided to overheat and shut down. But fortunately, the call didn't end, so I'm happy.
We were just talking about what exactly value proposition networks were in a real life example Lawrence was given of the hamburger to dollar. And we value that because we want to eat it.
Okay, and then there's a channel called Value Flows NRP Logging, where you kind of make a proposal or an intent, like, so you have these things that are like composable as recipes. Well, that's one thing. So like, how do you make a hamburger? Well, you need pickles, you need the hamburger meat, maybe the bun, some tomatoes, and other things that go into that. And then there's other people who are gonna make the hamburger, but they don't need to know what goes in. They just need some metadata that describes what's in a hamburger, and then you have a process where that gets sold, and then you have some sort of economic exchange. So there's a whole ontology called a resource event agent. And I don't. Well, I mean, this reminds it. I don't know if this is exactly value proposition, but it reminds me of it. Yeah. And so yeah, that's the thing. And I guess Lynn Foster has developed an ontology with that, and that's what this Discord originally been called. It was originally like a value flows exploration. So like, I guess NRP logging is like you kind of log your contribution, and then so one of the hopes is you could go retroactively like reward people, or you just have certain things. It was like, okay, this is so much unit effort out of the total, or however you want to assign it, or I did so many hours to contribute to this project. It was a really kind of attempt to kind of make the kind of open source makerspace kind of collaborative environment more, I don't know, do record keeping for that, I guess. So you'd have people like not working for free or necessarily. I mean, I guess if the project gets bought or rewarded in some way, then you'd have that. But I think that kind of came out with like interaction between Bob Hogan and I think Lynn Foster had been working with him. He'd been looking at some enterprise resource planning systems at some point, and then somehow he ran into TB, who was doing a lab up in Montreal with Sensorica, and he's really been championing the NRP logging and the value flow stuff. He has, I guess there was a other thing called like Hollow REA. I think that's in one of the channels. So that was like using this ontology and implementing it in a holochain. But like that's yeah, I guess that's a point of opportunity, because they don't really there's some noises going on in the Sensory Discord, but there's really not like a distributed space. It's really confined to like Montreal and a couple other people, but there's not really like composable networks of value that are going between all these different spaces and distributed space and time, really. So, just, I mean, I think that's where he wants to take it, but it's just a pretty simple Discord, and I guess that worked for concept, but just yeah, but I think that's about all I have to say. But about that, cool. Well, I'll just let somebody else speak if they want to comment.
Well, on the value proposition thing, so like, I feel like as a human being, I feel like I'm entitled to that hamburger. You know, like, or I'm a vegetarian, so I'm not gonna eat hamburger. But you know, like, I feel like everyone's needs should just be taken care of, and that the value proposition is we're here on Earth, you know, and yeah, sure we need to like put all the effort into the making of the food, you know, on the supply chain or whatever. Like that work needs to be done, and it needs to be done by people. But like, I'm just wondering if there's like different paths potentially for like serving human needs, just blanket outright, versus like doing all this like complex, oh, so like this is what I owe you and this is the currency exchange, and but it's just all for like nice to have stuff. I don't know. It's just a thought.
I like that direction. I think the reason why we don't have that right now is because in order for people's basic needs to be met, they have to work and get money and to pay for a roof over their head and this and then this. And it's all because we live in this like individualist society instead of something that's more focused around like, you know, families and communities. So I think like local communities that produce what they eat and what they use and what they do locally can more easily have access to this kind of thing, I guess, like where you know what you produce is of value to the people in the community and also what everyone else produces. But now it's like, you know, you get into like how do you manage those resources, which is like a commons essentially. And so it's like, you know, there's the tragedy of the commons. People take more than their share, and there's ways to deal with that and things like that. So I imagine kind of networking local communities together with all of these things in mind, so that you now have like a network of communities that have their own value production, and maybe even springing like barter economy or something out of that, where it's not like how much do I owe you or whatever. It's just like, hey, like I need this, you need that, like let's get something going, like let's trade. Like I don't know, it's definitely a fantasy of mine, and I'd like to see it happen even on small scales.
In systems like this, we can just like, say hamburgers and salads are free, but a speedboat you got to work hard for. But we messed up when we left the forest and the oceans. But that was a long time ago.
Yeah, the actually, and part of the problem is that like right now the business majors of the world do not know how to motivate people outside of restrictions on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like you're basically literally saying like, well, you need to work for me on this project, because if you don't, you won't have a house, or you won't have security, you won't have food, you won't have like shelter and like clothes. Like that's where we're at in the terms of like how do we motivate people. So
I mean, we're all here right now because we're motivated by other things than financial gain. So how do you basically like motivate people to, well, one, give people the confidence that they can um, safely give away one thing and then find a way of getting compensated for the other things. And then move basically towards like a what it would be quote unquote like the Star Trek version of society, where everybody basically works the jobs that they want to work because they find that has value to their society. So solve that.
Yeah, agreed. I think that's about all I can think about SwarmLinda. Anybody else have anything to add or close on?
Has anybody looked at like the implementation details? Like, how did they stick the landing with the? You said that there's a repo for this that with code and implementation.
So there's a thing called NetLogo that he was using, and some other Java tools like Apache Int, and what else? Let me see. I have to look it up. So I remember when I was looking for things, I was looking for not exactly. I couldn't really. SwarmLinda is, I think, kind of a project that was siloed in academia. I would guess. I mean, it's not really like a commercial thing, or it didn't really. I don't know if there was any code base, but I think there was maybe some Linda code that I found, and yeah. But he does give us some mention of kind of what he used, and yeah, it was NetLogo, and I forget system architecture. Section deal was a system architecture was NetLogo.
Can you link the not logo, whatever what that is?
Sure.
Maybe I'll look it up. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not. I'm just seeing a bunch of logos with nuts on them.
Oh, not logo.
Or,
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah, how do you spell it?
NET, like net.
Oh, I thought you said nut logo. Net logo. Okay.
You got like nuts.com, so you could order your special nuts, right? Yeah.
Okay, it's a programming language, integrated, and an IDE for agent-based modeling. Yeah, definitely interesting how this could be applied. Like one thought I had that I didn't share yet is how this could be applied to, you know, not just users being ants, but each user having their own agents that are also ants that are, you know, AI powered or whatever. So now you have like, okay, like for like a use case of this would be like anytime somebody posts something that links to this, I want you to you know retweet it and also like send it to this like little collection that I have, and I want you to and the retweet would just be like the pheromone, you know, reinstilling the pheromone of that content. And so then you kind of have like you don't have to have focused attention to ensure that pheromones are propagated because you have agents or ants on your behalf that you're kind of like sending out. But one serious risk I see with that is the imbalance of power on the network scale, where people who have the most resources determine the most pheromones that get sent out, which is why I think you can't really trust the global network scale, but you can trust smaller communities in which you know the people in real life, or you just like have some like, you know, sustained trust relationship over time and space with these people. And that way, like Dunbar scale, you know, numbers and all of that, like that way you can kind of know that there is not some, you know, fuckery going on with you know, pheromone whales or something.
They also they had metrics where they sort of balanced when things got out of hand. Like I think some of the tuples were getting overly concentrated or something like that. So that if there was an outage, it would be a bad thing. So but I also kind of noticed well, the whole act of collecting metrics is a centralized thing. You have to you have to have data from everything centralized so that you can aggregate through it and create a graph of it, and then apply that back out to the behavior of the ants. So I kind of noticed the author doing a bit of that too, and that goes in with what you're saying, which is in order to kind of have that sort of agreement for how an ant should operate to be an optimal ant. In the grand scheme of things, you do have to have some sort of trust relationship there.
Yeah, the solution is to do a federated network, or federated. I mean, what that means is basically that you have different rules that apply to tribes or smaller groups. Like for example, like in your own life, you've got your family, friends, and your coworkers, and then you've got your people that are geographically related to you, nationally related to you, and you've got everyone else. And so one way to solve this problem, I don't know if they did this in the article, but one way to solve that problem is to basically treat, instead of having one giant centralized ant hive, which sometimes happens when they idealize these things, it's everything's just a one giant thing, is that you take the same concept and you basically let it grow to its self-managing state, and then that is where you demarcate it. Then you get into the question of well, what hierarchy, what system manages the system, and then it's either a duplication of the original system, or it's a new system that uses the emergent properties of the systems that make up it. So that's one way to do it. I'm not sure if that's the right way, but it's a way.
Oh, just a random thought. I guess Brooklyn's not here, but you've been working on a kind of it might be eventually an internet kind of scale computer on IPFS with IPVM and a project called Homestar. I don't know if they're thinking about these types of problems, or they've already solved these types of problems, or what, but just kind of pointed that out. But and then they have UCANs, which are object based. Well, all the authorization stuff is self-contained within a I guess a JSON kind of blob, and there's some cryptographic chain attestations. I think that's what a UCAN is, rather than ACL, which kind of require to call to some server or coordinate these lists of what you're able to access. So they've been looking at that and kind of combining that with their IPFS kind of computer. Something I'd like to learn about personally, because I'd like to. I'm trying to understand probably more about IPFS, like Gabriel is, and more about holochain and their DNA, because I'm not really familiar with the holochain ecosystem, but I know there's these various systems, and they seem to trying to solve kind of similar problems. Some of them want consensus, some of them don't. I know Holochain doesn't really necessarily want consensus. But yeah, I mean,
Yeah, Holochain is. I was talking to I met Arthur Brock, who's like the founder of Holochain, and he explained to me their stance on it, which is that it's coherence, not consensus. So like blockchain is all about global consensus mechanisms, but you're kind of fighting against the laws of physics because global consensus doesn't exist. So you end up with like inordinate amounts of like power consumption and things in order to achieve kind of like a stab at global consensus. And so instead of doing that, because Holochain actually isn't a blockchain, it's yeah, it's kind of like small communities with rules that can be federated. But yeah, it's not a blockchain. And the way he was explaining it was that yeah, coherence over consensus, meaning help people like making what happens transparent and so that bad actors can be seen very clearly. So that it's like you don't have to worry about consensus because people can clearly see what's happening, and can determine if they would like to, you know, do stuff with that user or not. And if that user is obviously out in the open doing things that are inordinately bad for the, or disproportionately bad for the community or the network that it's involved in, then people can kind of just decide not to play with them. And that obviously opens up all kinds of other social things, like a lot of the social issues that happen in federated networks like Mastodon and stuff, where somebody kind of gets like blacklisted from, you know, a server and then suddenly play with anyone. And there's like serious issues with that too, like who gets to determine that. But I think at the end, the individual should get to determine that, not like some server or like server-wide thing. So there's like a lot of like social governance questions and problems there that rise up. But yeah.
Yeah, the blacklisting question is actually a really interesting one, because there's two ways to handle it. One is the punitive method of like forevermore this person shall ever be blacklisted, and then there is the redemptive method, which is you have to make a new identity and you have to rebuild that identity from the ground up. And then you get the question of like, well, what happens if the person does it again? And you get the opposite question is, what happens that if everybody on your network is really a secret saboteur, and at any point in time you could flip out and do something evil, at which point you fall into a ball because you realize that everybody around you could possibly be a murderer, and at any point in time could go on a psychopathic rampage. And the only thing keeping us all in check is this like comfort blanket of society that says that when I go outside, I will not be murdered. So that's another problem altogether.
I think the redemptive model is interesting because it models how it works in real life. Like if somebody screws you over in real life and you've known them for a while, you've lost trust, and you're always thinking about that lost trust, whenever you have dealings or interactions with them. And you can choose to cut them off forever if you want, or you can choose, you know, I'll forgive you, just don't do it again. Or it's somewhere in the middle or along that spectrum where it's just like, let's see what you do from here on out. Like the verdict's out. And being able to have that very easily visible in a user interface, like, and being able to trace that across, you know, a local network. Like I have kind of reservations about doing any of this at a global scale, because now you have like the ability for like a surveillance state to like, you know, have access and view over all kinds of, you know, reputation metrics and everything, and that makes me uncomfortable. So yeah, I think like trying to keep it as like federated local communities as possible rather than like some global reputation network would be probably a better approach.
Yeah, even Bitcoin makes more sense in federated approaches for its energy usages. But there's politics at play with Bitcoin now.
Everybody has their own altcoin. Actually, I thought about that. Is like everybody has their own altcoin, and then everybody uses a like a currency exchanger to basically act as a federated arbitrage system. And then you can use the value of the independent altcoins to negotiate cross altcoin transactions using yet another currency.
Introducing the John Galt coin.
Yeah. Take me to your compound.
Yeah. But I really like my billionaire friends. I use their currency. That's a cool idea, though.
It is a cool idea.
All the centralization uses so much energy on those global consensus networks. Quite wild.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody else has been into like a Bitcoin farm, but it is literally you're getting washed in heat as they pump like cool air in and like blow past you like gigawatts of power in the form of hot air out at you, and you're just like, this is terrible.
There are some interesting uses of Bitcoin with like flaring wells and like off grid, or like energy consumption to like level the grid. But I view most of that as political speak rather than solving a problem.
Yeah, I mean, if you really wanted to sink energy, we could just make more aluminum, or make more. What else can you make? I think you actually can turn. Actually, you can actually make electrochemically make like jet fuel if you have enough power using the like a electrochemical reaction to make jet fuel from like it's energy intensive, but if you're talking about like burning energy, it's like might as well.
Split salt, yeah. So I don't know. Should we call it? We're a little past the hour. You want to talk?
Yeah, I gotta take off.
This is a good length.
Okay. Yeah. I don't know if it'll dive into IPFS. Do you guys want to learn about value flows and value network or value? Well, you had the value proposition thing. I mean, so there's like two different things to go from here. Talk more about like IPFS and IPLD and stuff like that, or which I guess was the original timeline, or try to do both, or take a slight detour and talk about value flows, ontologies, and network logging, and I don't know, see if Lynn Foster would, after we're educated, want to come in on a call, or maybe you'll just talk to her on Discord, when she's in there, so we could tag her with questions, or either or the IPFS stuff, Brooklyn, and if you get into like data structure and like modeling transformations of, I guess, both computer programs and schemas and stuff, that's the Josh thing. And then there's a secure subtlebot guy who was joined the group. Yeah, I guess there's a lot of different ways and people we can reach out to too, so that's cool.
Yeah, and we can discuss a little bit in the Discord as well, so anybody that happen to not show up today can put a little bit of input.
Yeah, my vote's for value proposition networks and for finding a way of like testing or implementing them, because that's I think we have enough information or there's enough ideas to like start cobbling together something, or at least that's where my interest is at.
Yeah, I sense like some resonance between energy and value flow because of pheromones and picking up on that. So like I wonder if we could move further in that direction. Okay. Not necessarily like value proposition network specifically, but like what how does value flow in a stigmergic network, and how can you like build that right now? Like that would be my vote.
Right, and like, even if we go that direction, we'll have to revisit IPLD or distributed hash tables or all that other stuff, because we have to think, well, how do we do the compute on this? So it's just value flows is just like it has like, it's just an ontology. It's expressed in L, and that's using RDF, and that's how they chose to deal with it. So it's, yeah, I mean, either way we go, we kind of wind up at the same space, I guess, same place. In some regards, I mean, but, I guess if you
Sounds
like maybe
enjoy value flows, you don't think about the economics, but maybe you have to think about them in a different way, you know? And then I guess in this whole big debate of like consensus of meaning and all of that, and whether ontology is like universal. So, anyways,
All right. Sounds like value flow it is, and then on to more stuff.
okay. Yeah, thanks for showing up today. Appreciate it. Seeing you, Charlotte, and Gabriel, and Lawrence, and Jason, and
Nice to meet all of you, and
yeah,
great conversation today.
thank you.
nice to meet you all too.
Thanks.
See ya.
See y'all later. Bye.
See ya.